You know, I wasn't sure I was going to be a doctor until I got to the second half of college. I always knew that I wanted to do something with children and with music and with healing, but I hadn't figured out which was going to come first. If it was going to be music education or working with children in hospitals or whatever. So I ended up being a pediatrician, taking care of kids and playing music. So it was a sort of a combination of the three. And so that was always what my goal was. And fortunately for me, when I was a third year resident at Mass General in pediatrics, the Longwood Symphony was just starting up. This is in the early 80s. And within a year, there were 90 of us playing in this medical orchestra. And so I got involved way back in the 80s, and I've been involved ever since.
It's funny how the world is so connected. And so Lisa and I know each other from high school, where we played in the Punahou School Orchestra and the Honolulu Youth Symphony. And we both went to Radcliffe, now known as Harvard, and we played in the Bach Society Orchestra. And then we both had kids, we both became doctors. We totally lost touch with each other, but my kid's violin teacher, Sally Koo, is a student of Lisa's husband, Lynn Chang. And when Sally got married, I was at her wedding, as was Lisa. Mm-hmm. And we had this conversation about medical orchestras, the Longwood Symphony, obviously, at that point being very well established. And she had had a chance conversation with our director for the program for humanities in medicine here at Yale, Dr. Tom Duffy, who is a hematologist and my colleague. And I saw him in the hallway that week, and I said, I saw Lisa Wong after 20 years, and she asked if there was an orchestra at Yale at the medical school. And Tom Duffy said to me in his very Tom Duffy esoteric way, wouldn't that be nice? And that's kind of how this was born, that we got some funding from the program for humanities in medicine. We had a sight reading, 200 people showed up. And I hired my kid's instrumental teacher from school, Adrian Slawacki, who was Yale MMA, Yale College, also a violist and violinist like Lisa. And I was sitting in the balcony of the auditorium at the medical school listening to people sight reading a Rossini overture, and I thought, we could make this happen here.
There are some people who are in business who are musicians. There are people who are lawyers who are musicians, but there's much, much higher incidence of musicians that go into science and medicine because of the set rules and how to break the rules and getting delighted by the smallest change. For if you're a radiologist, seeing just a little shadow on an X-ray, that looks very exciting. Or listening to a change of a rhythm of a heart rate. That's really interesting. The same thing with musician when, suddenly there's an F sharp that you didn't know was going to come, or like a sudden change of chord. Those real small subtleties are the things that really excite us. And so I think we got to train very early to be excited by small subtleties.
The membership, which spans, doctors and nurses and medical students and researchers and all these sorts of things, are some of the busiest people in the world. And free time is one thing that is a very, very precious commodity for this group of people. And yet they would give up 3 hours at least of their time per week to come to rehearsals and then come to performances for this. Why?
Well, I don't think we think of that as giving up, right? This is something that
totally agree.
Everybody really wants to do. So it's sort of a gift. How many opportunities are there really to play music with other people once you start being really, really busy with your profession and your family and your community? And so I think that outpouring at that first sight reading was because that was probably one of the very few opportunities people had had to play or sing. We did choral works that night in a long time. And, you know, those of us who have chosen these other careers, non-musical careers, typically your instrument gets put aside during those years, the formative years of your career when you're just really busy. And then if you have a family, their formative years when the focus is on them and their music lessons and their education, right?
Yeah.
So that it's sort of a gift to be able to walk out of my office or out of the hospital and cross the street to the auditorium. And these people, many of whom I work with in one capacity or another, we share this other experience, which is very different than working in the hospital. You know, there aren't a lot of high stakes playing in an orchestra. You know, you might get a note wrong or come in wrong, but it's not going to hurt anybody. And the product at the end is evanescent, right? The rehearsal is unto itself and the concert is unto itself. And the consequences of it generally are all good, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very different experience than seeing patients or running experiments or, you know, things that people's lives or people's careers hinge on. And one thing is that it's done in this community, right? There are 50 other people sitting on the stage with you, and you're all in it together. To some degree, that mirrors what happens in a laboratory or in the hospital working on teams. But again, it's for a different purpose. And it satisfies maybe this emotional piece that you know you used to have when you were young and playing seriously. And when you get it back, it's precious.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the creative process, just working out in rehearsal a piece of music, is that whole process of as a group being creative is really rewarding, and then leading towards a concert. Very often people say that, you know, the concert's not the biggest thing for them. It's the process. It's going through the creative process together. And also, as Lynn said, you know, we've been in orchestras longer than we've been in medicine. And some of those were our most formative times in orchestral tours, or, you know, having and developing our deepest friendships. And for us in the Longwood, it's always interesting. The rehearsal starts at 7. And so people show up at about 2 minutes to 7 sometimes. Well, the brass come in or they warm up, but some people just sort of show up and they've been coming out of the emergency room or coming out of the ICUs or wherever, the lab, that the experiment didn't work. And for the first 10 minutes, it's just a cacophony. And I don't know if you experience this, John,
Yes.
but then suddenly you realize that's not the hat I'm wearing anymore. I can just be a stand partner to my string playing person, or I can just sort of immerse myself in this music again. And you can just sort of see everyone's shoulders sort of drop and they start to relax and they start listening laterally to each other instead of being the attending or being whatever they were a few minutes ago, where they're making all the decisions. Decisions are being made, something beautiful is happening, and it's really a healing process for the orchestra members. Like Lynn said, you know, we look for something that gave us comfort back when we were youngsters, when we were students, and there's nothing really that compares to being able to harmonize with somebody else and play music or sing together. You know, we do look forward to the non-COVID times again, when we can do this in a safe manner. I think we're really uniquely positioned because we as healthcare providers know where the healthcare disparities are or where the issues are, and to be able to use our music to serve the greater good has really been something that's transformative to not only the orchestra and its mission, but also the individual player. For the first 7 years or so, we were just sort of trying to figure ourselves out as an orchestra, and improving our tone and or improving our technique and all of that. But after that, we really were searching for what makes this relevant and why are we doing this, and even beyond the 3 hours that we were using to help ourselves, how could we use this to engage the community? And so since then, each of our concerts has been a partnership with one of the medical nonprofits in the Boston area. And rather than our raising money for them by playing a concert and giving them our money, which wasn't financially stable for the organization or not. And Longwood is not just Harvard. We have musicians from all over the city and 3 different medical schools. So then we started partnering with them and teaching them how to fundraise around a concert and to bring their own constituents, bring their own patients or clients, bring their staff to the concerts. And so that helped our audience. It broadened our audience and diversify our audience. And it also helped them to learn how to raise funds around a cultural event. So far we've worked with over 50 organizations and helped them raise over $2 million. And so it's been very rewarding. And a number of the medical students have ended up working at or volunteering at these different organizations. And, or some of our doctors who are working with one of the organizations would suggest that be one of our partners for the next season. And so it's been a really collaborative effort among both the community partners and the orchestra members.
In the early days of YMSO, the audiences were our friends and our colleagues. And the Harkness Auditorium where we perform at the medical school seats probably 600 or 700 people. And there'd be a lot of people there, but the seats weren't full. And one of my colleagues who felt that we were not advertising enough said, you don't know how to do this. You're too busy. I'm just going to take it on. And before I knew it, our concerts were being advertised on the screensavers in the hospital. And so it would say, wash your hands, nominate a nurse for the Nightingale Award. Grand rounds in medicine this week is something. And then the next picture would be us, and it would say Yale Medical Symphony Orchestra concert, And I think this sense that there's this wider community really came from that. And so suddenly the audiences are full of people we don't know. We don't know who all those hundreds of people are sitting out there, but they're of the medical community. There are patients, there are friends, there are people we don't know. The concerts are free. And so it's sort of this giving back to the community in a way that I sort of didn't really think about in the beginning.
Yeah.
And so one of the good examples of this was during COVID. We've been unable to rehearse. We can't gather.
Yeah.
And the 2 concerts we had scheduled for this spring both had to be canceled. And so one of our cellists, who is a plastic surgeon, said, we should do something that we can put out there since we can't give the concerts. And what happened was there was a musical video sponsored really by several departments, and people sang and people played instruments. And we submitted a recording of the Pachelbel Canon, something really simple that Dr. Thompson, our cellist plastic surgeon, literally put together in his basement.
Yeah.
And they put us at the end. I got so many calls and emails of people who said, I just cried when I saw that. And it happened right in the midst of our COVID surge.
Yeah.
And so that was a very meaningful thing, I think, for the community, that this was a thing without words, right? It's just a simple piece of music. But I think, people are looking at the gallery of musicians. It's similar to what the National Medical Symphony is doing.
Yeah.
And they saw people they know. They saw their doctors and their students and their friends, people that we work with, in the hospital side by side. So that I think that sort of giving to the community happens in many, many ways. What Longwood has been able to do is really impressive. what we've been able to do, I think, is on a smaller scale, but the reach within our medical center has been pretty far. So we had a board meeting last night, anticipating that this coming year may be completely disrupted. We're a big country, and as things erupt and die down across the country, it still affects everyone. And so I think the unfortunate likelihood is we will not be able to have in-person rehearsals for a long time.
At Longwood, we're having weekly meetings, and the first couple of weeks, our meetings were just check-ins, and people were just going around talking about what was stressful and what was working. And there was a real realization that we didn't really know our orchestra members personally, because it's just that so-and-so in the cello section and the trumpets who are over there. And, you know, when they're talking about their research, or they're talking about what was going on in their hospital, what was going on in their homes, or if they had a parent or a spouse who was involved in coronavirus, either ill or working on the front lines. So we really got to know each other better than we do during the 10-minute rehearsal intermission that we have. And so that was really, really rewarding. And actually what they're doing now is Ronnie Feldman is our conductor, he was a Boston Symphony cellist for about 30 years. So he's doing a score study of Dvorak 8. And so we've gone through the first 3 movements, and we're going to do the 4th movement on Monday. And so we decided, you know, we'll be a little bit nerdy while we have our instruments down.
Fantastic.
But the other thing that's happening that I think is a real silver lining is a number of the individual musicians wanted to do something to bring music into the hospitals, and the barriers that we had before of going into the ICU or going into isolation rooms, in a way that barrier has been broken by virtually performing. And so there's a project called Project Music Heals Us that was written about in the New York Times. Some of the students at HMS have adopted that program and are playing in the COVID ICUs virtually for patients at Mass General and at the Brigham and at Beth Israel. And also there was a respite hospital that was built in the Boston Convention Center called Boston Hope Hospital. Fortunately, we've been able to close it again, but during the time when it was open, musicians would record a musical dose, and we would put them together as a playlist of about 30 minutes of music, so that the nurses could bring the tablets to the different patients at their bedsides, and they could just listen to 30 minutes of music that was played and dedicated to them for healing. So that really brought out for us 2 things. One is we could play again, but also I think orchestra musicians generally are shy of playing by themselves. And so that sort of pushed us along to do that more and to get better at technology, which is also what the virtual medical orchestra is doing, is pushing us to get better at technology.